there we go. I'll go back to share screen. Okay, so this is from her archive. She says she's got three people here: Henrietta Leavitt, Edwin Hubble, and Tracy Smith, who's reading something that Tracy Smith wrote. So let's see what it says. Oops. Why doesn't it want to?
Do you want me to? Did you put new batteries in there?
No, I didn't. Let me just see if I can move it down here. So Henrietta Swan Leavitt in 1908 was analyzing photographic plates at the Harvard Observatory, single-handedly measuring and cataloging more than 2,000 variable stars, stars that pulsate like lighthouse beacons. And she began noticing a consistent correlation between their brightness and their blinking pattern. That correlation would allow astronomers to measure their distance for the first time, furnishing yardsticks of the cosmos.
I would call that a pretty significant contribution.
Mhm.
So here's what she was looking at and so forth. Let me go back up here. And then we have, let me get this down here.
Let's see if this one.
We have let's see if this works. No.
It
Okay.
might be this. I'm gonna take them all out.
And there's one there. And I don't hear any click when they go in. Nothing.
That's back in. That affect anything?
Oh, we got the mouse working. Well, that, yeah, must have done it. We
That's
must
a
have
good
been loose. Yeah. Okay. So meanwhile, a teenage boy in the Midwest had a childhood love of astronomy, and his dying father, though, wanted him to become a lawyer. But when his father died, Edwin Hubble would drop the law and would unleash his passion for the stars into formal study. And he leaned on Henrietta Leavitt's data. And he demonstrated two revolutionary facts about the universe.
I think that's a beautiful sentence. To upend millennia of cosmic parochialism, demonstrating two revolutionary facts about the universe. It is vastly bigger than we thought, and it is growing bigger by the blink. Well, I thought that was
Yeah, it
nice
is.
writing.
So here we have, hold on. One October evening in 1923, he was at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California. Hubble took a 45-minute exposure of Andromeda, which is then thought to be one of many spiral nebulae in the Milky Way being our galaxy. So the notion of a galaxy, a gravitationally bound swirl of stars and interstellar gas, dust, and matter, did not exist as such. The Milky Way, a name coined by Chaucer, was commonly considered an island universe of stars, beyond the edge of which lay cold, dark nothingness. When Hubble looked at his photograph the next morning, compared it to the previous ones, I'd like to imagine that he furrowed his brow, and then with a gasp of revelation, he, and this we know for a fact, crossed out the marking N on the plate and then scribbled the letters VAR underneath it and could not help adding an exclamation mark. So here's the N here. Here's the VAR with the exclamation mark, the 6th of October, 1923. So Hubble realized that the tiny fleck of Andromeda, previously mistaken for a nova
In Andromeda,
could not possibly be a nova, given its blinking pattern across the different photographs. It was a variable star, which, given Henrietta Leavitt's discovery, could only be so if the tiny fleck was very, very far away, farther than the edge of the Milky Way. Andromeda was not a nebula in our own galaxy, but a separate galaxy out there in the cold, dark nothingness. So suddenly the universe was a garden blooming with galaxies, with ours but a single bloom. And in that same year, in another country, suspended between the two world wars, another young scientist named Hermann Oberth was polishing the final physics on a daring idea to subvert a deadly military technology with roots in medieval China and rocket launch an enormous telescope into Earth orbit, closer to the stars, bypassing the atmosphere that occludes terrestrial instruments. It would take 2 generations of scientists to make that telescope a reality, a shimmering poem of metal physics and perseverance. And they named it after Edwin Hubble. It's the Hubble Space Telescope. But when the Hubble Space Telescope finally launched, April 24th, 1990.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, that was yesterday. Hungry to capture the most intimate images of the cosmos humanity had yet seen, humanity had crept into the instrument's exquisite precision. Its main mirror had been ground into the wrong spherical shape, warping the colossal eye. In fact, there's a company here in this area called Perkin-Elmer, and they were the ones that actually ground the glass for the Hubble telescope, and they did it incorrectly, and I forget how the finger pointed came out, but someone should have caught it, obviously, but they didn't. So up the coast is what happened was there was a space shuttle that went up to this Hubble telescope and actually physically replaced the optics in the telescope.
Was that robotic?
But there was people doing it.
Oh.
That was years later. So then up the coast from Los Angeles, where the Mount Wilson Observatory is, a teenage girl watched her father, who had worked on the Hubble telescope as one of NASA's first Black engineers, come home brokenhearted. He didn't know that his observant daughter would become the poet laureate of his country, would come to commemorate him in the tenderest tribute an artist daughter ever made for a scientist father. That tribute, the splendid poetry collection, Life on Mars, earned Tracy K. Smith, let me get this straight, the Pulitzer Prize, the year that the Hubble's corrected optics captured revolutionary ultra-deep field image of the observable universe, revealing what neither Henrietta Leavitt nor Edwin Hubble could have imagined, that there isn't just one other galaxy besides our own, or just a handful more, but at least 100 billion. And right now the estimates are it's at least 1 trillion. And each of these galaxies contains at least 100 billion stars. And what the Hubble observed in other telescopes is it looks like some significant fraction of these stars have planets, something like 50% of them, some huge number like that.
Which I say makes, one would hope, intelligent life. I hope it's intelligent,
It's got to be there, sir.
inevitable, you know.
So here's what Tracy Smith wrote. My God, it's full of stars, part 5. This is the poem. When my father worked on the Hubble telescope, he said, they operated like surgeons, scrubbed and sheathed in papery green, the room a clean, cold, a bright white. He'd read Larry Niven at home. Larry Niven is a very well-known science fiction writer. And he would drink scotch on the rocks, his eyes exhausted and pink. These were the Reagan years when we lived with our finger on the button and struggled to view our enemies as children. My father spent whole seasons bowing before the oracle eye, hungry for what it would find. His face lit up whenever anyone asked, and his arms would rise, as if he were weightless, perfectly at ease in the nerve-ending night of space. On the ground, we tied postcards to balloons for peace. Prince Charles married Lady Di, and Rock Hudson died. We learned new words for things. The decade changed. The first few pictures came back blurred, and I felt ashamed for all the cheerful engineers, my father and his tribe. The second time, the optics jibed. We saw to the edge of all there is, so brutal and alive, it seemed to comprehend us back. And so there you have it, out of the archives. Just, it would be 1990, so it would have been 34 years ago. I remember the disappointment when that happened.
Yeah.
So
It's a good reminder, though, of how, tenuous things are and how delicate and precious, but with perseverance, things are possible that wouldn't be possible if people gave up the first time it went wrong,
yeah. So tonight we're going to try and do a sort of a dive into archetypes, which we've talked about numerous times. And we've got a couple of graphics here. They each have 12, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 sectors to them. So this one is clustered. 3 of them come together for stability, for belonging, for achievement, for discovery. But there's traits for each of the 12 archetypes that are running around here in each of these things. Similarly over here. So let us take a look. What are archetypes? Do you want to do this?
We'll see if I can read. A statement, pattern of behavior, prototype, first form, or a main model that other statements, patterns of behavior, and objects copy, emulate, or merge into. Informal synonyms frequently used for this definition include standard example, basic example, and the longer form archetypal example. Mathematical archetypes often appear as canonical examples. I'm not familiar with that term. The Platonic concept of pure form, believed to embody the fundamental characteristics of a thing.
This is the second type of archetype. The first type was the statement of the pattern of behavior. The second type is the Platonic concept of pure form. So that this is Plato's version of a pure form is an archetype.
The Jungian psychology concept of an inherited unconscious predisposition, behavioral trait, or tendency, an instinct, shared among the members of the species, As any behavioral trait, the tendency comes into being by way of patterns of thought, images, or affects. Unlike personality traits, it is collective, not personal. And the tendency represents the evolutionary adaptation to specific cues from the environment. Survival and thriving in the physical environment, the relating function, acquiring knowledge, etc. It is communicated graphically as archetypal figures.
So Jung has a very different, he's keying this toward a behavioral trait. And it's collective, not personal. So you or I could both resonate with a trait, but it wouldn't necessarily be unique to you and I. Collectively is what it would be.
Well, and other individuals would resonate with others.
Right.
You take the next paragraph.
So a constantly recurring symbol or motif in literature, painting, or mythology. This definition refers to the recurrence of characters or ideas sharing similar traits throughout various seemingly unrelated cases in classical storytelling, media, and so forth. This usage of the term draws from both comparative anthropology and from Jungian archetypal theory. So one of the people that worked with Jung studied fairy tales and had all kinds of examples of what these symbols would be that would make up fairy tales, and so forth.
Marie-Louise von Franz,
Right.
who was brilliant in her own right.
Right. So the reason for doing this is that this is how to say this, we're attuned to these archetypes at birth, but it's that the archetypes, I think, what reach out to us would be the collective archetype would resonate with each of us.
Well, a Jungian astrologer would say that they're reflected in the chart. And so the moment of birth, by that we mean the first breath of the individual, corresponds with the configuration of the planets representing the archetypes. So in Jung's frame of reference, they really are pre-existing, and with the emphasis on existent. They're not just concepts, they're not just ideas that we gravitate to. They really exist and they really are operating.
But it also means
way.
Yeah, it also means that they evolve or change
Right.
over time. You're not cast in concrete.
When I first started studying this, I thought that Jung meant that we live the archetypes and that we live, say, a different mythic motif somehow as an expression of who we are. But that's not what he was saying. He was saying that the archetypes are there and they're living us. They're living through us. We don't live the archetypes. They live us. They're already there. They're already alive and growing and moving and relating and interacting with each other apparently. And we just kind of piggyback on them. But different people are driven by different ones, And you don't want to get completely subsumed by one. That's not healthy. That's when you become, I forget, dominated in some way. Like for me, Jung is what's his name? Trump is an example of that. He's been completely subsumed by the archetype of, I don't know, like a ruler of some kind.
Power.
Right. And there's nobody home. Maybe I shouldn't say this if it's going to be seen in mixed company, but possessed, that's the word. Jung would call it possession. And that's not something we want. As we were talking about his dialogue with James Joyce, Joyce had a daughter who was schizophrenic, who Jung was treating at one point. And Joyce said, well, what's the difference? She's talking about a lot of the same archetypes that I'm talking about. And Jung said, well, the difference, Jim, is that she's drowning where you were diving. He was able to consciously dive in there, work with them in various ways, commune with them, bring them to life in his art, but it didn't completely take him over. That was sort of more like what was happening with his daughter, was that they were taking her over and she lost any kind of a lens. And Jung said, it's important to have a glass bottom boat, like when you're
Right.
going over a
School of fish.
A school of fish or a reef or something. It's nice to be able to see them, but you don't necessarily want to be swimming with all the sharks, barracudas, and animals down there. And because then you become possessed. That was his term.
Right. Yeah, the Portuguese man of war, the jellyfish, not good. Okay, so archetypes really is a modern word. It showed up in 1540 in England, drawing on the Greek archetypon. But this means first molded. So it's the beginning or the origin of the pattern or the model or the type. And as such, archetypes are very close analogies to instincts that long before any consciousness develops, it's the impersonal inherited traits of human beings that present and motivate human behavior. So this is what I was thinking happened with babies as they were born, that these archetypes are there and are going at it from the get-go before you actually have an innate individuation, personality. You're just soaking this in. And so once you develop this consciousness, though, this continues to influence your feelings and behavior, which is why people look at things like birth charts, for astrology, which Jung did for all of his clients.
I think the word archetype is a good synonym for prototype. It's the model,
right,
or the mold, even.
Yeah.
For the type. But it's the first type, as Plato would say.
Yeah, and then it evolves. Okay, it's you start there, and then over time it changes, it evolves. So this chap says there's really only 7 basic plots when you look at all the stories that have been told over the millennia. So one of them is where you're overcoming the monster. Another one is going from nothing to incredible riches. Another one is having some quest for whatever it is. Another one is having a voyage and all the experiences on the voyage, and then you return. Very different person, probably. There's comedy, there's tragedy, and there's rebirth.
This list, as I've said to you before, bothers me. It just,
Yeah,
comedy is just like a catch-all title. It's not, that's not a story comedy.
no,
And they don't have anything here about salvation, redemption,
oh, they have rebirth.
rebirth. Okay, that's different though, I think.
Yeah, it's not.
And there's nothing about love of any kind, but
No,
what about the troubadours,
yeah. There was a 20-page paper that somebody wrote in Hollywood in the 50s, and it listed all the different types of basic plots that they could use in movies. And so this got circulated all over the place because they have people doing movies and they got to go in and do like rewrites or write the movie in the first place. So this got a lot of play, and it's still floating around in some version today. So that's the only reason why this is in here. Is there's a small number. It's probably not 7, and it's probably not this list, but it's a small number, 10, 12.
Well, they do use Joseph Campbell's book in Hollywood,
Right.
the hero's journey. So I made Bart stick this in.
Right. So here we have Joseph Campbell. So he has the monomyth. You want to this?
I'm having too much trouble seeing it.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
so
So let me see if I can. Let's see.
The plus.
No, it doesn't work. Okay. So he's got these a separation. Well, sorry, there's some initiation of something which leads to a separation that leads to the initiation of some activity that leads to a return. So this is what Campbell liked. So we have some sort of your starting point here. And then all of a sudden there's a call to adventure. You oftentimes refuse this first call to adventure. It's
like Jonah and the whale.
Yeah, or going to Troy to get Helen back. Then there's some sort of supernatural aid where typically some sort of supernatural beings or gods start to interfere to encourage you to not refuse this, but to go on this call to adventure. And then you cross the first threshold, having done this. Now you're right in the middle of it, and you're in the belly of the whale. The whale has gobbled you up, and you're sitting there inside the whale. What are you going to do? And so now there's all kinds of trials. You go down this road where you're trying to get out of the whale. You're trying to do whatever it is. And there's trial upon trial occurring here. Then there's a meeting with the goddess to kind of fix things. The woman is a temptress. So the woman is tempting you to drop all this and come. Then there's some atonement with the father, where all the bad things that you've done are atoned for. There's apotheosis. What would you describe this as?
I'm really not sure.
Apotheosis?
It's been too long for me.
Hold on. We'll go look up
I
apotheosis.
think it's like a denouement. Like a,
I'd like to mention that in my younger years, when I was first involved in working on my conditioning, we used the word archetypes with a different meaning. Archetypes, like your parents, are sort of like archetypes to you.
oh, there's the mother archetype and the father archetype.
Yeah,
Yeah, those are, yeah.
yeah, but the thing is, hey,
those are examples, but there's many more archetypes than father and mother.
yeah, but the archetypes in this sense is just creations in your own mind. They're just like temporary understandings of what you think is reality, because your parents present to you a way of looking at the universe and understanding. And then later you find out that there's more to it than what your parents had in mind or how they thought about it.
Right.
Like you pick up on the parents' prejudices and negatives and all kinds of other things, and you take them on as being real. But then you find out later that well, first of all, they're not what you want to do, and you sort of put those archetypes aside as part of the overcoming your family conditioning. So that's my memory of archetypes. It's quite different.
Sure. Here's hold on a second.
Okay. So they're saying it's the climax or the culmination.
Yeah, we'll just show you here. Here's what apotheosis is: the highest point in the development of something, the culmination or climax. So the appearance as Hamlet was the apotheosis of his career, the elevation of someone to divine status or deification or similar sorts of things. So there you go.
Okay.
So let's go back to what Joseph Campbell is saying. We're here with apotheosis down here. Then there's the ultimate boon. Well, you're at your pinnacle here with apotheosis. This is the ultimate boon. There's the refusal to return. There's the magic flight where you get rescued from without, and then you cross the return threshold. And now you're the masters of two worlds, the one you started out in, the one you left. Then you have your freedom to live. So you've gone full circle, according to Joseph Campbell.
Wow.
Why would this be called a monomyth? It's a single myth, monomyth.
He's saying they all basically follow this kind of cycle. So
All myths do.
right. And they say good stories do. And it's this kind of structure of, crisis and breakthrough and going into the belly of the beast and reemerging, as you were saying, transformed.
What is going beep beep?
I think it's a smoke detector.
Jesse? Yeah, must be here. Smoke detector. Okay. So then, leaving Joseph Campbell, we go off to literary archetypes. So in literary criticism, archetypes determine the form and function of literary works. A text's meaning is shaped by cultural and psychological myths. and cultural archetypes are unknowable basic forms that are personified or made concrete by recurring images, symbols, or patterns, which may include motifs such as the quest or the heavenly ascent, or recognizable characters such as a trickster, or a saint, or a martyr, or a hero, or symbols such as the apple or the snake, and so forth. And all of these things are laden with meaning, and they evolve and they change over time as to what we think these things mean. So the archetypes reveal the shared roles that are universal, such as the role of mother in her natural relations with all members of the family, or similarly for the father. And these archetypes create a shared imagery, which is defined by many stereotypes that haven't separated themselves from this traditional framework.
They're typical,
Right.
but they're also individual.
Yeah. So we're just surveying the different types of archetypes. This is the literary type. And this leads to archetypal literary criticism.
It's too small for me to read. So.
Yeah, the anthropological origin of this came out with the Golden Bough, which was written by a Scottish anthropologist, James George Fraser. And he dealt with cultural mythologies. He was part of a group of comparative anthropologists working out of Cambridge University. And the Golden Bough was widely accepted as the seminal text on myth that spawned numerous studies. Eventually, the momentum carried over to literary studies. So he identifies practices and mythological beliefs shared among primitive religions and also modern religions, and argues that the death rebirth myth is present in almost all cultural mythologies and is acted out in terms of growing seasons and vegetation, and then harvest and fall and winter, and then rebirth. And the myth is symbolized by the death, the final harvest, and then the rebirth that occurs in the spring of the god of vegetation.
He was one of the first people really looking at the universality of them.
Right.
Across cultures.
Yeah, other people had seen these things, but he was synthesizing it in a bigger framework. So he cited the Greek myth of Persephone, who Hades took to the underworld, and Persephone's mother, Demeter, who was the goddess of harvest, was so sad losing her daughter that she struck the world with fall and winter. And then while in the underworld, Persephone ate 6 of the 12 pomegranate seeds given to her by Hades. And this meant that she was forced to spend half the year, or 6 months from then on, in the underworld, representing autumn and winter, or death in the death rebirth myth. And the other half of the year, Persephone was permitted to be with Demeter in the mortal realm, representing spring and summer, or the rebirth. So everybody's familiar with this. It's just that he's trying to put it into this larger framework. So this gets us to Jung and Jung's book, Man and His Symbols. And Jung is, in contrast, very immaterial in his focus. He theorizes about myths and archetypes in relation to the unconscious, which is an inaccessible part of the mind. So from Jung's perspective, myths are culturally elaborated representations of the contents of the deepest recess of the human psyche, the world of the archetypes. And here he's distinguishing between personal and collective unconscious. So we have the latter, the collective unconscious, being particularly relevant. This collective unconscious, or objective psyche, is a number of innate thoughts, feelings, instincts, and memories that reside in the unconsciousness of all people. Jung's definition of the term is inconsistent in his many writings, in part, I think, because he changed his mind over the years. He wrote so many different things and he gave so many different talks that he was bound to be inconsistent.
Well, it was over a period of like 40 years.
Yeah, and he wrote lots of things that still haven't been published. So he calls the collective unconscious the a priori. So it's inborn and it forms intuition, while in other cases he talked about it as a series of experiences that come upon us like fate. But regardless of the many nuances, the collective unconsciousness is a shared part of the unconscious. So to Jung, an archetype in the collective unconscious is irrepresentable, but has effects which make visualizations of it possible, namely the archetypal images and ideas, due to the fact they're inaccessible part of the mind. The archetypes to which Jung refers are represented through primordial images, which is a term he coined, and primordial images originate from the initial stages of humanity, have been part of the collective unconscious ever since. And it's through these primordial images that universal archetypes are experienced and the unconscious is revealed to whatever extent it's revealed. So with the same death rebirth myth that Fraser saw as being representative of growing seasons and agriculture, Jung envisioned death rebirth archetype as a symbolic expression of a process taking place not in the world, but in the mind. And that process is the return of the ego to the unconscious, a kind of temporary death of the ego and its reemergence or rebirth from the unconscious. So by itself, Jung's theory of the collective unconscious accounts for a considerable share of writings in archetypal literary criticism. And it also predates the height of archetypal literary criticism by over a decade. The Jungian archetypal approach treats literary texts as an avenue which primordial images are represented. It wouldn't be till the 1950s that there were other branches of archetypal literary criticism. So Jung was leading the way in doing this. Any comment?
Not that I can think of right now. I think it's just about to.
Yeah, this is coming out of his book, Man and His Symbols. This is a
kind of odd view of the mind. Anyway.
Well, he was really coming up with this. Remember, he went through this period where it was almost like he was having a mental breakdown. And he was trying to experience the unconscious, and he did this from what, 1913 to 1930, you know, some period like that, with the peak of it being 1919. And then he wrote this up, and this became the Red Book, which we talked about, except the Red Book wasn't published until 2009.
Paradigm is a really good word. He's talking about the layers, though, of the psyche. So it's not just the mind. That's only one aspect of the psyche. And he's talking about universal patterns that are actually cross-cultural. So it's not, just Eastern or Western. It's something universal, not in the mind, in the psyche. The psyche is larger than the mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it includes the unconscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious, as well as the conscious, which is what most of us think of as the mind. And I think he would say it's the tip of the iceberg when you look at the patterns that recur.
Yeah, here,
I would say, like, the Buddha is an example of one of those patterns. The savior, you know, that's a pattern of not just mind, it's larger than the mind. The Christos archetype, you know, emerged at a certain point in our human development. It wasn't always there. And, you know, it had a certain objective quality that affected history enormously. Collective human history was following that archetype, as it happened to be on the ascendant when the, you know, the sign of the fishes was rising in the east at the spring equinox. You know, so it's not just an idea. It's this whole confluence of things that are objectively happening. So it's not just a concept or a view of the mind. It's a view of everything
you have,
that jives with history. It jives with culture.
you have these key people like Lao Tzu and the Tao, the way, so that and how you live is the way, is the path for you. You have the Buddha going through the Four Noble Truths and what comes out of that, or you have Jesus of Nazareth with his teachings of love and compassion, and the parables that he put out to capture people's attention. So all of these people, the reason why they had such great impact, I think, is they were really essence of archetypes here that really were key toward shaping history.
They embodied the archetype, not the other way around.
Right. So let's see. We go back to Plato here, because Plato was the one that most people point to as having archetypes, but he talked about ideas. There were these pure mental forms imprinted on the soul before it was born into the world. And so the archetype is the essence, in order to avoid confusion with Plato's conceptualization of forms. Okay, so you see, you know, the forms are these mental ideas or that exist only in the mind, and they're really independent of the mind. They're
Larger than.
They're purely, again, mental, and they were collective in the sense they embodied fundamental characteristics rather than any specific peculiarity. So in that sense, you know, Plato, you know, started this whole notion of archetypes.
Well, this second paragraph here is really important. While it is tempting to think of forms as mental entities or ideas that exist only in our mind, the philosopher insisted that they are independent of any minds. They're real. That's really, really important. That's a really important distinction. These, I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
It's Eidos.
Eidos or Eidos.
Eidos.
were collective in the sense that they embodied the fundamental characteristics of a thing rather than its specific peculiarities. In the 17th century, Sir Thomas Browne and Bacon both employ the word archetype in their writings. Thank you, Jessie. Thanks. So that's what I said in the beginning. I used to think of it as that they're nothing but mental ideas, nothing but mental entities. Or like creations of the mind, but that's not what they are. It's more like the mind comes out of them.
I mean, in terms of Buddhism and my own experience, it's more like you actually can have an awareness of the nature of the universe and comprehend it in your own mind. It's a different understanding. I mean, you look at my brother, like awareness allowed him to look at things that most people wouldn't believe or comprehend. And yet in terms of awareness, that's what happens. I mean, it's very unusual to encounter somebody who has that level of awareness. And that's one of the problems, is it's not really imaginable, but it's entirely a non-verbal understanding of the universe from your own mind. And that's what deeper realizations give you. This goes deeper and deeper until you can actually really comprehend exactly what's happening. Anyway, it's kind of a different approach altogether by the sounds of it.
Well, I think it's important to say that we're not saying one is better than the other, but they are definitely different. So to measure one by the standards of another is kind of missing the point.
Yeah, a lot of the observations that Ron did, were these archetypes in the sense of what we would think of as particles and energies that make up what we call physics today.
Those are archetypes.
Mm-hmm. What was unusual was
they're model.
He had a framework that had been developed over centuries. And in my opinion, he was able to flesh out a lot of the details in it that were not clear.
But nobody using those models would believe them.
Yeah, they will. He's right. He was just ahead of his time. That happens all the time.
Right.
And and ultimately, people have to believe that deep meditation allows you to gain this sort of insight into things. But that was why we cited the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that he said, after deep meditation, look what you can do. And it's sitting right there for 2,000 years, and no one's actually tried it to the extent that Ron did. I'm sure there's many other people that have done it, but they didn't have the framework that he had.
That's what I was going to say. He had the scientific framework. He had the model and the vocabulary of quote unquote Western science.
Mm-hmm.
But these sages and monks and so on wouldn't.
Right. They look at it and it's pretty. I don't know what it is. I like it. I sense that there's some order there. I don't know what the order is.
but I doubt they would
That
conceptualize it,
was his contribution.
but they wouldn't conceive of it as, you know, atoms and
No, well, yeah, I mean, the
nuclei.
notion of atoms has been around forever, but no one, and it wasn't until 1900 that people actually were able to do measurements to say, oh, there really are atoms. You know, it was a hypothesis that seemed useful, but then they said, well, if everything's made up of atoms, then they started looking and they discovered the atoms themselves are made up of electrons and protons and neutrons, and then those are made up of smaller things as well. So you keep digging down, down, down. And what's unusual is Ron went all the way down to the bottom. He said, here's this is it. There isn't any more there. You can't keep digging beyond this point. These are the fundamental entities.
Well, unless somebody with different thought construct goes about it in maybe a slightly different way,
No,
they might see
yeah,
deeper levels with their vocabulary, with their.
yeah. I
their
think one of the
structure.
things that's clear
It's a
is
paradigm. I think that was a really good word that was
Yeah.
in there earlier. So it's all a paradigm.
one of the things that's come up is this notion of being an observer of what's going on. So Ron was unusual in that when he observed something, it wasn't that he was simply observing it, he could stop it. He had the ability to take an electron that was jittering all over the place and just literally stop it, and then draw pictures of it, draw sketches, because he was a very good artist. And so there was a combination to it, and him doing this, stopping these things, apparently did not distort things. So when he was looking at this double slit experiment, where I have an electron and there's a slit in a piece of tinfoil, and the electron goes through the slit as an electron, but then if there's two slits that are close to one another, then the electron immediately senses there's two slits and becomes a wave and goes through the two slits as a wave, not as a particle through either one. And if you became an observer and looked at it, if you're now looking at it, that's different than just having the electron and the two slits. So now you have a third entity, an observer, looking at the electron. Well, if the observer is looking at the electron, then it stays an electron. So it'll go through one slit or the other slit. But you've changed the problem. The observer is now part of the situation in this, and that's what's different. And so that's probably what will get picked up on is when there is a full-blown theory of all this stuff, is exactly how the observer enters into this to influence what it is that you're actually seeing, which is for right now a mystery. People look at the double slit experiment and they say, I have no idea what's going in there. How could this thing become a particle and a wave like that?
Well, with that, I would say it's because our paradigm is so inadequate.
It is. But that's why Ron did the observations, was to
But he was
encourage.
still working within the structures of our paradigm.
I understand, but it could be that other people will look at his observations and say, okay, now here's a different way of saying the same thing, which is more complete and clears up these ambiguities.
It may be that whatever it is simply behaving as a wave or a particle, but it's some third thing, and it's not a dichotomy at all.
No, it could be, but because of his observations, I discount that, that's all. But that's me.
But he couldn't explain what was going on.
Well, his explanation was that there's this thing called information that was coding an electron, and the information was constantly scanning the world around it. And when it detected a change, it went to the algorithms embedded in the information, and it said, okay, now I have to do this because I have a change. Now, The question is, what are those algorithms?
Right, and how does that really explain anything? It just raises more questions, I think.
Well, you have to know what I understand. But that's the problem with anything like physics. Physics does not really say why things occur. It says how things occur. And there's a huge difference there.
Right. And
So-
even that may not be accurate.
Right. No. These are working hypotheses,
Right,
and you have to be willing to drop them when they don't do the job. That's what happened in the 1900s when it became clear that classical physics couldn't explain what was really going on. So
and then
What-
just kind of change the subject and avoid that.
because it's a foundational question.
Right,
You shouldn't ignore, what does it really mean to observe? What was Ron doing in observing this stuff?
well,
And I said it was a combination of him observing, but he was also
stopping.
things. He was controlling things. So that makes you wonder, well, did that cause something else to happen that we missed?
Well, who or what is observing?
Right.
If there's no self, it's not.
Well, it
not
was
a
him
self.
observing with his under deep meditation, but it wasn't.
But what does that mean? That doesn't even mean anything. If there's no
Well,
self.
one of the components that is kind of hard to understand that's there, like, is sort of the comprehensive nonverbal understanding that comes along with this kind of deeper awareness. Like I was very impressed as well by Ron's observations in terms of electrons and how they appear and disappear and that sort of thing. But he also had other comprehensive observations, if you want to call them that. He could look at somebody's mind and observe the karma from their previous lives. He basically told me a lot of things about what happened in my previous life, and they were very helpful indeed. So there's a whole understanding that comes along with the kind of the nonverbal understanding of the different levels of awareness and reality that nobody talks about, but only the people who actually have them already. So
Yeah.
I mean, but my teacher was like that. When he came into my mind, he knew my mind perfectly and all the history and all the conditioning and everything. And we could talk about it.
What could you sense of his mind?
Say it again.
What could you sense of his mind? If he could sense that of your mind.
Well, it's just a simple a matter of deeper awareness. Like anyone can actually do that if they actually have developed that. I mean, basically, you have older souls who this comes naturally. They just have it naturally already. They're born with it because it's unfolded over many lifetimes. These are kind of levels of understanding and awareness that are just come with the older souls who have been doing it for a long time. And it's very, profoundly deep.
Right.
Anyway.
We'll go back to Jung again here. The thing he had here was 4 major archetypes. He had the Anima.
Read that paragraph. That's an
Okay.
important paragraph.
Okay, my views about the archaic remnants, which I call archetypes or primordial images, have been constantly criticized by people who lack sufficient knowledge of the psychology of dreams and mythology. The term archetype is often misunderstood as meaning certain definite mythological images or motifs, but these are nothing more than conscious representations. Such variable representations cannot be inherited. The archetype is a tendency to form such representations of a motif, representations that can vary a great deal in detail, but without losing their basic pattern.
That's kind of what we were just talking about.
Right.
It's hard to explain
Yeah.
if people aren't really delving deeply. As he said, they think they understand and they don't.
Right. Right. So Jung had these four major archetypes, which he called primordial images. So he had the anima or animus, which would be, I would say, separate from the self. It's your mind, your anima. So whatever you mean when you talk about life, you have this.
Except that for most stereotypical people, the anima is stronger in a man, and the animus is stronger in a woman. So, in a heterosexual consciousness, that's how they come into being. The anima is said to represent the soul of a man, and he projects that form into, often a female projection, and that may be his wife, it may be his mistress. It can vary. That those are usually two kind of different archetypes, the mistress and the wife. The wife is more like a version of the mother, and they don't really give the same symmetry to a woman's psyche, but a woman's projected self is the animus, which is masculine. You see certain women referred to as animusi, and that can mean they can be very argumentative and want to dominate, whether they do or not. They want to be dominant. They're very possessed by the male side of the psyche. And men who are really possessed by the anima archetype are very fussy and fastidious, and I don't know, there's definite symmetries, but they're opposites, I guess.
Right.
Is what I'm trying to say.
So this is one of his four. The other three are the self, the shadow, and the persona. So the self, is coming through as you as an individual. This includes everything that makes up you, whereas the shadow is the dark side, whatever.
It's what we're not conscious of.
Right, that's why it's called shadow.
The persona we're usually more conscious of and trying to project.
But the shadow could be holding us back or hurting us.
And usually ends up projected onto other people.
Right. So this
And
This-
the
this-
more judgment somebody has against a shadow figure, the more you know it's a projection.
So this led Jung, because he's doing this over decades, and now he came up with these other images. You have a wise old man, a child, a mother, a maiden. So he has the wise old man. He doesn't have, for example, the warrior or the the murderer. He came up with these.
Well, they can have positive and negative expressions.
Right. And again, to go back to what Marjorie said, these are all influencing the person. This collective unconscious that's out there ends up influencing these traits that are in everyone, according to Jung.
I've had a lot of people talk to me about, transcending their charts. I've never seen it. People think it, they like to think it. They may be expressing it on a more sophisticated level, and it may be more conscious. That's definitely possible, and I see that usually happen as a result of meditation is one way, and another is therapy. And the people who become the most conscious do both.
Yeah.
But there's still always unconscious. It's infinite. There's still always more.
Yeah, as Bruce said, you have this sensing of what this is, but you sense that there's more. You can sense how much more there is, but you can't really articulate, here's what's really going on.
Well, we're each in these finite, containers or identities.
Right.
But as you develop more, you're incorporating more of the infinite oneness, but it's still always going to be in an individual form until you die, apparently. And even then, it seems like there's still a membrane around the individual.
And you're still evolving. All of these things are evolving over time.
Right. And that monad retains some kind of identity as it reincarnates. As we've said, if there is none of that, there's no monad with any kind of soul identity, then what's reincarnating? And why bother? If there's no growth, if there's no learning.
Yeah, no, there has to be something that's there. This is a cut now at trying to break down these archetypes using various taxonomies. This is not the be all of the end all, but it just, people trying different things. So we have an ego type, a soul type, or a self type as a way of viewing these things. But it's probably pretty incomplete if you stare at this. It doesn't begin to capture everything, and it misses what Jung had said.
Well, right there's no mother.
Right.
I guess you could call
the anima, animus is
Right.
missing.
the innocent. You can say as a child, or the innocent and the orphan are
Right,
kinds
right.
of.
So then we go off to here's an even more extensive thing. This is
Okay.
going to be 12
They're like constellations.
So these are four on a page, and we're going to have 3 pages. So there's an innocent family, a hero family, a citizen family, and a caregiver family. Okay. So are these sufficient to encompass what you would call family? Probably not. Okay. Even with all the things they've got here. Then we have this explorer family, rebel family, lover family, and creator family. So you start to see this is an attempt to try and capture, some more stuff. And finally, the jester, the sage, the sovereign, and the magician. So here's 12 different categories, each of which has subcategories that come up here. And even this is probably incomplete.
I like just looking at the classifications, though.
Yeah. Yeah, jester, I think, is an interesting one for, being an entertainer or, someone.
But I like trickster much better.
Right.
It's using trickster because that's
Because they use jester.
right.
Yeah. So anyway, this is what we've got here. So we just put in here, here's Jung's natal chart. So what in the world is Jung doing? How does Jung play in this if his taxonomy is so great? Any comments on this natal chart?
Well, he and Freud both had 7th-house sons, which you see here. And his is fairly close. It's not, it's 11 degrees, but that's still fairly close to Uranus. So the 7th house is the house of the other. And that this means that he was very other-centered. He was very astute and insightful into others and really kind of lived for others. It wasn't just for himself. And that's really kind of the opposite, in a way, of the sun in Leo, which is more the creative child archetype. But that was there. He was a creator very much. He was very much an artist and a builder. He loved building things with his hands. He built the house, like the tower that he lived in, and built a psychology really from the ground up. So,
but he really was a teacher from the get-go by all the things that he wrote.
Right.
And gave lectures on and went all over planet Earth popularizing these ideas.
But the 7th house is for really for consultants and healers. It's a close one-to-one way of relating. The house that the sun is in shows the basic orientation. It's what we think of as the conscious ego or the self, but the whole chart represents what we would call the self with the capital S. So there isn't just one part of it operating in one part of life. The other most personal planet is the moon, which is more our intuitive side. And men tend to give that away to the women in their lives. The Venus is often, I think that's here. This is so blurry, it's hard to see. The Venus would be the Anima, and the moon would be the mother or the wife. It's usually more mature. And women have their counterpart is Mars and the sun. But more women nowadays, I believe, do identify with their own sons and don't just give it away to the men in their lives. But women tend to also unconsciously identify more with their moon. So we're all far more complicated than the sun sign and the sign. And
The other thing that just strikes me in looking at this is he's got things all the way around. There's no concentration of everything into one particular area.
Right. He's very diverse, very complicated and diverse. And normally when somebody comes in with a chart like this, they spend a long time in their lives kind of floundering because they're pulled in so many different directions. They're interested in everything. And they have a lot of trouble specializing. But if they can hang in there, the second half of life is usually a lot more rewarding and richer because they've developed these various interests and not just one or two or three, that then they start to come together in this more complementary way. And he's got a theme in his chart is these pairs of planets. Chiron is a healer, and I think that's Neptune. So that's spiritual healing. Then we have the moon and Pluto. That's a lot of depth and intuition and insight, and that's more feminine. And then here we have Venus and Mercury, and that's writing ability, and it's usually quite poetic. Being in Cancer. Is that Cancer? All right, this is Cancer. Yes, that's Leo. It's very drawn toward the past, which he was, a voracious student of history.
Mythology,
right?
He funded the scrolls for the Nag Hammadi,
right?
Making those available, translating them into modern languages so that people could, look at these things.
And then the Sun conjunct Uranus is very much the imprint of the iconoclast, which he really was. He was going against a lot of molds.
He went up against Freud from the get-go, said there's more to this than just dreams.
And suppressed libido.
Yeah.
He brought in really, you could say a spiritual aspect to the psyche that they were just completely discounting. But I think his largest contribution was the collective unconscious, and that it goes beyond the mind, as I'm saying. That I don't know if the archetypes can live without humans. That would be an interesting question. Are they there?
They'll live because there's other aliens on other planets, on other stars, so they're there.
But the humans really don't seem to be able to live without archetypes. And I think it's a kind of symbiosis myself. But he's incredibly complex, and there's a huge amount of energy. All these red lines that look like boxes, those are all squares. Those are all 90-degree angles. And here you have a T-square because this is an opposition. It's the part of fortune isn't that personal, but when these things come together in these configurations, here is Sun is square Pluto and Chiron. He's got so many marks of a healer there. Chiron is said to be the wounded healer. That was the centaur, who was the one who taught Apollo and everybody else that about healing. And he ended up, I think he traded his mortality. I forget who he traded it with. Theseus, somebody.
His
so-
immortality,
right, right, so that he could die
right?
because he was in this eternal agony, having pricked himself with one of his own arrows. This is a very poignant story. And some of us have very, very strong chirons. That's a comet that's caught in orbit between Saturn and Uranus. And it's said to rule over or govern the interface between the Kundalini energy as it's traveling up the spine, which is the spine, the concrete is ruled by Saturn, but Uranus is the first planet beyond the naked eye planets. And Saturn has the rings that represent finiteness in another way. And Uranus is the iconoclast, the rebel that goes beyond there. And that's said to also represent the electricity itself, the energy. It's not the spinal column, is what travels through there, but it's also on another level. The Sushumna is not just the spine. So these things aren't just physical. It's
There's something
abstract
funny about
energy.
Uranus because it's
its orbit is so crooked and so elliptical.
its actual axis of rotation. If you look at the Earth spinning North Pole to South Pole,
Right.
it's inclined at
Like
23.5 degrees to the
right.
ecliptic plane. But Uranus, basically that axis lies in the ecliptic plane, which is a tip off that probably Uranus got smashed by something and got tipped over and spins around its North Pole.
Horizontally.
In the so
They call it the maverick. That's another thing.
Yeah, there's no notion of seasons because there's a notion of season in the sense that as it runs around the sun, different parts will get exposed, but it's nothing at all like what we would have for seasons.
Well, they're so long, and the orbit is so elliptical. It's really distorted. There's books called an ephemeris that shows the progress of the planets through our point of view around the circumference, which is the zodiac is just like describing the space. Astrology is not about the stars, it's about the relationships between the planets and their changing configurations in the space around the Earth. Conceptually is at the center. So this is all unfolding around us, which modern astrologers know that the sun is at the center, but that's not the way we experience it or the way we see it. That's at the periphery. So you get all this information that's, I would say, synchronistic, not causal, when you look at the chart. But so there's a lot in this chart that says maverick, rebel, iconoclast, following his own path, hearing his own drummer. There's just a
teacher,
ton, in there, and teacher and healer. But so Uranus is the first one to go beyond the safe kind of inner realm of the solar system. And then Neptune kind of is more fuzzy and transcendent. And then Pluto is the last rock from the sun, and now it's been demoted, but
They think they
Ceres-
found another one that's out
Right.
there. So
and Ceres is about the same
Yeah.
size as Pluto, and Ceres is in the asteroid belt, and she's kind of she's been promoted in her status to be on a par with Pluto.
probably because Ceres was the core of what was a planet there
Right.
that got blown up. So there's a lot of evidence that if you look at all of these comets that are running around in asteroids, and you are able to take their trajectories and take them back in time, you'll see that 3 or 4 million years ago, they appeared to all converge on what would be a planet that got blown up. or to put it differently, what we see is the shrapnel,
Right.
the asteroids and the comets
Well, it's
of a blown up planet.
Right. It's between
Doing Mars and
Mars,
Jupiter. So that's it for archetypes. And we thought it was important because they keep showing up everywhere. And yet, as you can see, there isn't even a good definition that we can come to of archetype, where we walk around it, but we can't put it into sharp focus.
It's definitely not ideas from your mother and father. That's not it.
But
Yeah,
there's something there. I like Jung's idea, though, of this collective unconscious that is triggering these latent things when you're a baby, so that you resonate with what Marjorie was talking about on your birth chart. All these things when you're 1 to 2 years old, and all you're doing is eating and sleeping and pooping, and that's it.
Well, but you can look at them for the great cycle as well. The period, the great, year
Yuga, yeah.
of Pisces brought us Jesus and the Buddha.
Right.
They were both exemplars of the age of Pisces, of compassion and transcendence. Those are Piscean qualities. And so the Buddha embodied them as an exemplar, not unlike Jesus embodied them. It's a fact. It's not an opinion. It's not an interpretation.
Right.
It's a fact that they lived and breathed and did their work and contributed their consciousness to the human collective consciousness at that time. So this is saying that wasn't a mistake or an accident or a coincidence.
The fact that we're still talking about them shows their impact. There's a lot of other people that lived then that we're not talking about. So that is it. We'll reconvene again next week. We're coming up on the final crunch time for the class, and I think June 16th is the last one. So we got another, 7, 8 classes. We'll see for this year. So, okay, have a good.
all right,
And any comments, anytime. Okay,
okay.
bye-bye.